All right, so today I'm going to talk about Terminalwire, which I think is the easiest way to ship a command line application for your web app. So let's jump into the actual problem first. So I came head on to this thing when I was working at Fly, which was roughly about a year ago, and I crack open the repo and boom, I see this thing. It's got 120,000 lines of code spread out across almost 700 files. And I'm thinking, this is insane, right? Why is there this huge repo just to send these text commands to and from a server? It seemed crazy to me, and of course I'm thinking, because if you Rails so much, well, hey, there's got to be something like Hotwire for command line apps, right? And I'm sure a few of you in here are thinking oh my gosh, is this person going to invent SSH from first principles again? No, and you're going to see in these code demos how this thing is not SSH. All right, so let's get started with what a stack looks like today whenever somebody's building a command line interface application. And Fly is not alone in this. If you've used Stripe or if you've used a lot of these other kind of CLIs that are interacting with these web services, it looks something like this. You have a server, it has business logic on it, yada, 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 API servers, and then you're like, oh, I know what, I'll ship this client that interacts with the API, right? And everything actually starts off pretty easy at first. But it turns out APIs are complex, because what happens whenever you need to ship a new feature? Guess what you get to do? You get to update the software on that thing. And if you've ever had to deal with installed software and keeping that up to date, the thing you do not see on this chart is all the auto-updating infrastructure that you're going to have to deploy. And we've been spoiled by the web, because guess who does auto-update infrastructure for us automatically? Google Chrome, right? We don't do that with command lines today. So there's a lot of complexity going on there, and I'm thinking well, how can I improve this situation? And of course, if you see complexity, the first thing you should try to do is delete it and see what happens. So what if we just delete the APIs? And of course, I'm thinking of what does SSH do really well? And it streams standard I/O up and down over the wire. It does that incredibly well. So I'm going to steal that from SSH. But the thing that you'll run into with SSH that you don't need for modern web applications, you don't need the pub key stuff. Nobody uses that. If you log into Stripe or something like that, you're typing Stripe login, it's opening a browser, you're going through some kind of crazy SAML, SSO, Google, Apple, OAuth flow thing, and eventually you end up with this token on your command line interface. And if you think about every single company that's building CLI is building that, it's kind of insane. So we're in this world now where all these different companies are essentially shipping their own web browsers for their CLI. All right, so I see this problem. I actually didn't build anything at this point. And I leave Fly, and this problem is just living rent-free in my head, and I can't get it out of my mind. So what do? I build a prototype. And what do I do after I build a prototype? I post it on Reddit, Twitter, just everywhere I can get the word out, because the way I want to build stuff is by talking to people. And so I put this out there, a stupid easy CLI that works with Rails apps. So I put this out there, and a company called Terminal, not to be confused with Terminalwire, they see this, and this person is shipping hardware. So they're shipping these e-ink displays. The last thing this founder wants to deal with is building an API and going through all that ceremony just to get a command line interface out for his developers to use, so that his developers can develop plugins and stuff for these new e-ink displays. So he's like, cool, I get it. And I'm like, this is awesome. This is one of their e-ink displays, by the way. And within 5 days, he installs Terminalwire and has this command line interface running. And the 5 days includes shipping it to production, and he actually had his users using this command line. So if you've ever started a company, one of the first magic moments is that experience where a stranger is using your software and not your parents. Fortunately, my parents don't know how to code, so I knew that wasn't going to be a problem. But what was even cooler than that is a stranger of strangers were using this thing. So it was pretty cool seeing that. And it turns out this founder had to ship MFA, and this is the ultimate test, right? It's okay, you install this client, you don't have to update it, you don't have to deal with all this auto-update infrastructure. So this person builds the feature, they ship it, and all the people that were using it, they did not have to update their clients. So that's when I knew I was onto something with Terminalwire. I'm going to get into some of the technical details here. So, but before that, since I'm kind of telling the startup story of this, I ship the client, that's awesome, but what happens? MCP starts taking off. And this was I don't know, 9 months ago. And then all of a sudden, nobody cares about command lines anymore. We're just going to have robots doing everything for us, and everything's going to be great. But it actually turns out that MCP is not the best protocol if you want to integrate with AI. And this is something that Anthropic has been talking about recently. I think there's a date on this somewhere, but this was published like within the last few weeks. And it turns out if you take these command line calls and annotate them with all this JSON, it's just burning through tokens like crazy. So if you're just like typing in commands through a command line, it doesn't. So a company called Plane comes along, Go Plane, which by the way, they're like secretly hiring all these awesome engineers. So if you want to work at a Rails shop, check out Plane. So they come along and they're like, hey, we have actually like played around with MCP and we want to integrate with Claude. And they tried Terminalwire, and it turns out it burns less tokens, and then kind of the end result of whatever the LLM is working on is higher quality than MCP. This is purely anecdotal right now, so don't come up to me later asking like, well, how many less tokens does it burn? So this is like just kind of starting out. It's like, oh wow, Terminalwire may accidentally be one of the best ways to integrate with AI. So I'm going to go with it. Secretly, I just want for more command line applications to be out there. And I think it's kind of funny, like I'll bet Plane is going to be the only payroll provider that has a command line interface. So if you work in HR and you know Bash, check this out. All right, so this is developer conference. Let's look at code. This is the server. We're actually going to start in the server. And what's kind of weird about this is you're going to see the command line deployed to the server. How many people have worked with Thor in here, which is like the Rails? All right, so some of you will recognize this. All right, so to get started with Terminalwire, you actually install it in Rails. So you could do this now in your Rails application. And what it does is it creates a folder in your Rails application called app terminal. These are where all of your terminal files live. And this is actually where you deploy your terminal, which is why you can deploy to the server, and the client doesn't have to update anything. All right, so this is analogous to like the application controller. How many of you recognize this current user code where you're like doing this in application controller and setting a cookie? So what you see happening here is interesting. Whenever you set that session cookie, instead of writing that in a browser, it's actually their terminal is writing a file to their workstation in their terminal. And that file, of course, is encrypted and tamper evident. So if they messed around with it, it would raise an exception. You could catch that and show some kind of error and handle that. The other fun thing about shipping a command line interface is going through the whole launch a browser, going through whatever the crazy authentication flows are now, and then, of course, setting the current user in that user's terminal. And so it just takes like a little bit more code than this. I had to delete some code to get this thing like so you could read it, but we'll say like 20 lines of code. You can implement the launch a browser, log in, put a token on the client side, and you don't have to think about any of that stuff. You're just talking to the client, and you say, hey, client, launch a browser. And these are things that SSH can't do. So SSH, you can't set cookies, you can't launch browsers, you can do standard I/O and the puts and all that stuff in here. That's just streaming the standard I/O over a WebSocket to the client. They see whatever they see, and that's all happening over encrypted WebSockets. So that's kind of the transport stuff that's going on here. And this is what a resource looks like. So think about a resources controller in Rails. This is kind of the analogous thing in Terminalwire where if you typed in Terminalwire ls, it would just like print out all the licenses from the command line. So this is kind of what a resource would look like in Terminalwire. All right, so what does the client look like? We're going to leave the server, and the client, this is what it's like whenever your users install your application. So Terminalwire has this whole install script thing. You just give this to your user, and in this example, they're installing the TRMNL, which is that e-ink SDK thing. So the user runs this command, and then they just run this thing that looks like a binary, right? TRMNL. For all they know, it's this binary that's local on the machine, and then they see the output, which is streamed from the server onto the user's terminal, and this is what they see. All right, so what does the inside of this thing look like? Well, if we look inside of the terminal binary, you can see there's two things. We have terminalwire exec runtime and this URL. So whatever the command is that you type, it gets sent to that URL that you see on there through terminalwire exec. And this is just like some fun with shebangs and all that stuff. So the one thing that I want to leave you with is like the way that CLIs work today. Again, imagine a world where if you shipped a change to your web application, you then had to go over to your web browser and like ship an update to that so that it was compatible with the changes you made to your web page. That's the state of the industry today whenever you're working with command line interfaces. So Terminalwire is analogous to a web browser in that if you make changes to your command line application, you should not also have to push changes for your client. Terminalwire handles that for you, and it's streaming all that stuff over the wire from your server. So if you want to make changes to your CLI, you're just deploying it to the server, and it streams up to the Terminalwire exec thin client. So if you want to know more about this, terminalwire.com. There's a lot of documentation up there. You can install the gem and get this going today. I'm at 0 seconds. Thank you.